When Paul McCartney introduced the concept for Let It Be during a 1969 studio session, John Lennon didn't respond favorably. In a later 1980 interview with journalist David Sheff, Lennon reflected on the experience, characterizing the creative process as extremely unpleasant. McCartney brought Let It Be to the Beatles in January 1969, roughly 8 months before Lennon would officially begin distancing himself from the band. At that point, the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership was fraying. The two were increasingly at odds, frequently clashing creatively and growing resentful of each other's demands and directions. For Lennon, the tensions seemed to crystallize when McCartney presented Let It Be. The song was rooted in a dream McCartney had about his late mother. However, when he started performing what would become the song's familiar lyrics and melody, Lennon felt it strayed too far from what he believed defined the Beatles' sound. Lennon told Sheff that the song felt entirely like McCartney's personal project, something he believed had no real connection to the band's identity. He remarked that it seemed more like the kind of material McCartney would eventually produce with his post-Beatles band, Wings. Lennon also admitted he couldn't understand what McCartney was aiming for when composing Let It Be. Looking back, Lennon thought the song bore more resemblance to McCartney's solo efforts than to anything the group had created together. He even suspected that McCartney had been trying to imitate the style of Simon and Garfunkel. Lennon speculated that Let It Be was McCartney's attempt to write a song similar in spirit to Bridge Over Troubled Water. Although he admitted there was no concrete evidence, Lennon believed McCartney was striving to achieve a similar emotional tone. However, the timeline casts doubt on that assumption. Let It Be was released in May 1970, while Bridge Over Troubled Water came out in January that same year. But in terms of production, Let It Be had been recorded much earlier, in January 1969, whereas Simon and Garfunkel recorded their hit between August and November of that year. Given the chronology, it appears that Lennon may have been reaching for a way to portray Let It Be as unoriginal, but his criticism didn't end there. Another element of the song that bothered Lennon was the reference to Mother Mary. As someone who was vocally critical of organized religion, Lennon disliked the spiritual interpretation the lyric could invite. Although McCartney clarified that the line was a tribute to his own mother, Mary McCartney, who passed away when he was just 14, Lennon's discomfort with the song remained evident.